Night is honest because it runs out of energy to pretend. By the time the high desert cools to a brittle hush, the lies have cooked off and the air tastes like metal and ash, and every sound in the Aries Gateway complex declares exactly what it is. Compressors sighing, fans murmuring at regulated RPM, footfalls measured against fire code distances. Inbound comes to me, not the other way round, and my job on the graveyard is simple in the way a loaded weapon is simple. Don't let it go off in the wrong direction. The gate sits in its recessed bay, an ellipse of machinery framed by poured concrete ribs. The architects gave it the proportions of a nave and the acoustics of a confession box. When it runs, the floor plates hum in nested harmonics. When it sleeps, you can hear the building think. Outbound is a morning religion. Purposeful faces, government-issue protein bars crinkling in anxious hands, pep in the stride that broadcasts belief. Inbound belongs to the night, hollow-eyed, quiet, relieved that the second breath arrived where the first one started. The memos from compliance say the system works. They say it so neatly you can hear the smile in the PDF. I badge into the service corridor at 1:53, the hour the cameras tell the fewest lies. My feet know the grid by memory, the little soft tilt in the floor near the mess, the grated vent that whines on a C-sharp when the air scrubbers cycle heavy. The coffee machine against the wall exhales its breath of burned chicory and melted plastic. I pull 2 cups by habit, because if ritual ever kept a submarine afloat, it can keep a gate honest. Ben Ortega rounds the corner at 2:06, right on the inbound manifest, and for a second, all the dumb human parts of me come back online. There he is, my burrito and bad coffee buddy, the guy who hears a sick coil the way a good mechanic hears a timing chain on the edge of prayer. He looks better than he has any right to look after 2 weeks in dust and recycled air. The desert is cruel to skin. It gives everybody that leathery patina you get when the sun has etched its name in your cells. Ben is smooth, rested, pressed like a fresh uniform in a recruiting poster. Malloy, he says, like he's standing where he belongs. It's his voice. The pitch is there, the lazy drift on the vowels, the after-midnight cool that never needs to raise itself to be heard. Long ride? I offer him the first cup, steam curling like a promise. I brace for the 2 quick knuckle taps he always gives my cup, the tiny toast that makes bad coffee palatable, and the shift official. Felt short, he says, taking the cup. Fingers warm against my fingers, then nothing. No tap. He sips, and the sip is immaculate, an advertisement for the idea of drinking. The hole in the air where the knuckle tap should live is a small thing, stupid, petty, beneath reportable thresholds. But holes in air are where all the cold lives. It rushes into the lungs and sets up house. You still stashing those peanut bars in my locker? I ask light. Or you finally moved on to the classy stuff? His mouth puts on a grin that fits his face exactly the way an answer key fits a test. Man, you know me. I eat whatever's around. The real Ben would have made a joke about caviar. He would have accused me of sock rot. He would have asked if I'd aired out the old gym bag that, according to him, had achieved independent citizenship. He would have wrinkled his nose and said the words that turned his daughter into a particular person and not a line in a profile. A ridiculous nickname he confessed to me 3 beers deep. The question sits on my tongue like a loaded round. What do you call her? I don't chamber it. A test that big is a door you only open if you want to see who walks through. He drinks. He looks around the corridor with a surveyor's even gaze, But it isn't curiosity. It's a reading from a page you can't see. His posture is perfect. People are never perfect. Our skeletons are pendulums. Gravity tugs on our attention. We fidget ourselves back into place. Ben is a plumb line. "Good to be back," he says, dropping the empty cup in the recycler. The motion has the crispness of a folded letter. Everything is normal. He walks away toward the maintenance junction with the stride of a man who has practiced being a man, and the corridor absorbs him. My coffee cools in my hand until it stops smelling like anything at all. At 2:21, I'm in the hub. Lights low to keep the screens brighter than my thoughts. Camera 113. A looks down the service hall outside the mess. It's a camera that knows me. I've approved its firmware updates and cursed its dead pixels and bought it a surge protector it didn't deserve. I spool back through the buffer until the timestamp catches up to the moment Ben walked out of frame. There he is again, in the middle of the service corridor, centered so precisely it gives you the uneasy tickle of a symmetrical face. He stops. He faces a blank wall. He becomes a picture of himself. The time code clicks forward with bureaucratic patience. 0214, 0230, 0305. Cleaning carts pass. A tech nods. The river of overnight life streams around the stone in its throat. Ben doesn't check his device. He doesn't scratch his jaw. He doesn't bounce on his heels to warm his calves. He abides. If you want to see how long a minute takes to run when it refuses to be chased, watch a body that forgot to negotiate with gravity. At 5:18, he moves. It is not a stretch or a groan. It is motion designed to be unremarkable. The recording doesn't exhale. I do. Forms protect us from the weather of the world. I open a new incident. I type the date, the camera designation, the exact start and end of the vigil. I write, subject Ortega, Benjamin, ID 774B, observed stationary in fixed posture for 3 hours, 4 minutes. No discernible micro-movements or postural adjustments. I add, no signs of distress, corridor operations unaffected. I attach the clip and flag it for Rock. Rock reads paper, like it's the last thing in the building with a soul. His eyes move twice over the lines, and the sigh that comes out of him is not disbelief. It's the long breath of a man who keeps a ledger for a storm and has learned which columns never balance. He initial scratches the corner. "I'll file it," he says. He doesn't ask if Ben is okay or if I am. Surprise would have been a kind of kindness. The invite pings my device at 18:07 the following afternoon. Meeting RE-IR 9345, Compliance Suite 3F. Sender, Brooks, Caleb, Analyst. I shower in the dormitory that smells like damp polyester and sleeping men, put on a crisp uniform because they care about that in rooms with thermostats set to persuasive, and ride the quiet elevator up. Caleb's office is icebox cold and tastes like pennies. The only personal artifact is a succulent placed exactly at the desk's dead center, as if decoration is a math problem that can be solved. "Ryan," he says, professional smile engaged. "Thanks for coming in. Please." He rotates a tablet toward me with my incident report on it, blood-streaked with red strike-throughs and green insertions. My language has been massaged into soreness. "Just a few small adjustments for clarity," he says, warm as a closed door. "Alignment with post-transit wellness protocols. No discernible micro-movements has vanished. In its place, extended rest in a low-stimulus posture. The duration remains 3 hours and 4 minutes, but wears a note like a Band-Aid. Consistent with fatigue profile." The thing I saw has been recatalogued under a different genus. He stood still for 3 hours, I say, because sometimes you have to hear the sentence with your own ears to know it still exists in the world. Caleb nods sympathetically. Language, Ryan. Stood still can be read as accusatory. We prefer framing that supports reintegration. We don't want to pathologize colleagues who've completed demanding cycles. His thumb hovers near the sign light box he's cued for me. The smile holds, but the eyes have changed jobs. They're no longer decorating his face, they're measuring me. I think of waves. I think of the way a rip current pretends to be a road you can walk back to shore. I push the tablet away with 2 fingers and keep my hands clear. I can't sign that. The warmth drains from his expression with clinical restraint, not a frown, an adjustment. We'll be in touch, he says, and the succulent witnesses nothing. Back in the low light, I find Omar where the building keeps its secrets. A service junction with its tongue of conduit and its teeth of brackets and hose. His cart is an altar of labeled spray bottles and folded rags, pads for the buffer, stacked like clean moons. Omar, I say. Malloy, he answers unhurried. I do not say vacancy. I do not say tide sludge or daughters or the prayer of 3 beers. I say, I need to know how someone stands for a long time. I need the floor to tell me the truth. He studies my face like a map he's walked before. He does not ask why. The floor knows, he says, if you prepare it to listen. At 1:12, we enter 113A under the clatter of the overnight vents. He kneels and works a fingernail of chalk into the seam of grout between 2 tiles, just back from the camera's favorite parallax, so the light will shadow it. The mark is so small it doesn't exist unless someone intends to find it. Then he runs the buffer with a precise hand, laying a thin gloss of wax that turns the concrete into a slick mirror. We watch it dry into a story waiting to be written. For the rest of my shift, I watch 113A, I tell him. He nods once, the benediction of a practical man, and leaves me to my vigil. Time is elastic if you let the machine stretch it. Screens tick. The gate sleeps and breathes. Between 3:52 and 4:03, the corridor remains empty like it's practicing. At 4:11, Ben appears. He steps into the frame and pauses. Then he aligns his boots with a geometry teacher's gratitude, heel and toe, precisely over the chalk kiss Omar tucked into the grout. I do not wait 3 hours. Duration was never the point. At 5:12, he turns and walks out with that flawless, frictionless gait that believes in nothing as strongly as it believes in not being noticed. Omar rolls into frame 5 minutes later, the buffer whispering across the wax with a purr I can feel in my teeth, even from the hub. I want to run. I don't. I let the camera finish its thought. I let the recording log its last second like a good clerk. Then I move. The corridor smells faintly of solvent and citrus. Omar says nothing. He flips the buffer up to show me the pad, a felt circle that usually wears a Jackson Pollock of scuffs and dust. Tonight, it is nearly clean, but for a coin of gray near the edge. The ring is perfect. No smudge at the rim. No crescent of an ankle correcting its microfault. No child's finger drag where the world pulled and was answered. A man sways, he says softly, tracing a bow in the air with a forefinger. He lives in arcs. Heel to toe, side to side, even in stillness, a conversation, he taps the ring. This is a post. Physics is harder to edit than verbs. I look at the concentric print and feel something in my chest shift a click deeper into certainty. This is a receipt. This is a timestamp on a fact the building tried to translate into weather. On the pad of my thumb, where a signature might go, the skin feels electric. Back in the hub, I opened the incident file again, not the one with Caleb's edits. The copy I saved to a private partition with a name only a night guard would pick. I add the photograph of the buffer pad, Omar's chalked seam, stills from the time code. I write, zero sway evidenced by concentric dust ring. Duration not determinative. Recommend review of postural analytics thresholds. I add Omar's name to the observation log with his consent and the date and the time the pad turned truth into geometry. I print a hard copy because paper argues in a different courtroom. Rock reads it with the same exhausted reverence he gives the sunrise. His jaw works once. He signs without telling me approval or disapproval because he no longer believes those are meaningful categories. He files. On the way back to the hub, I pass the coffee machine and pull 2 cups out of a muscle memory I refuse to let atrophy. Steam rises, curls, disappears. I tap twice against the empty second cup and hear the dry little click of knuckle on paper. It's nothing, a secret handshake with no other hand. The night thins toward morning, and the gate, asleep, keeps its own counsel. The cameras sweep. The analytics make notes, and then forget them because they are obedient. The desert outside turns the color of unshaved cheeks. I take my notebook from my breast pocket, the little flip-bound one with grease in the spine, and open to a fresh page. Date, time, one word, in block letters as neat as the ring on the buffer pad. Vacancy. I close the cover and listen. Somewhere under the floor, a coil sings a minor third too low. Somewhere above, the HVAC clicks into a mode it prefers. My screen shows the quiet corridor of 113A, wax dulled to ordinary, chalk hiding like a seed. The machine is perfect at being itself. My job is to notice when its reflection isn't. The machine did not blink, so the system did it for her. Compliance answered my incident with policy. A memo circulated at 1703 announcing post-transit dialogue guidelines, which meant nobody was allowed to ask returning personnel anything open-ended for 72 hours. Reduce reintegration friction, it said, as if conversation were sand in a bearing. Wellness checks began to populate my calendar in the dead center of my shift. 15 minutes with kind eyes and clipboards to determine whether I was too tired to trust my own eyes. Rock reassigned my patrol to the outer loop and assigned me a partner named Harris, who spoke softly, smiled easily, and never, not once, swayed when he stood still. You can fence a man in with velvet if you stretch it tight enough. Caleb's next move was theater in miniature, a variance review in a soundproof conference room, 3 chairs on each side of a table that had already decided which sentences would count. Rock sat rigid as a rule book. A woman from HR scrolled through a screen with practiced boredom, and Caleb presided with the warmth of a clinical pamphlet. They brought Ben in and asked him questions no more alive than the ink on their forms. Arrival date? Caleb prompted. October 22nd, Ben said, voice even, posture flawless. Primary duties on colony? Maintenance of primary grid, sectors 1 through 4. He never stumbled because files don't. My notebook lay flat shut in the pocket over my ribs. Every test I'd run lived there waiting for oxygen. I gave it one breath. "What did you call your kid stomp dance?" I asked, soft enough to sound like a slip, loud enough to cross the little table. A small, exact silence fell out of Ben's face. The pleasant mask stayed in place while something behind it reached for a shelf that did not exist. He reset without blinking. "Let's keep to the checklist," he said, and I had the answer I was afraid of and came here to get. They called me fatigued and thanked me for my diligence. I walked out holding a certainty with nowhere to live. Quiet tests in quiet rooms could not win against a machine that edits the record in real time. I needed to put the truth into a room too large to repaint. Ethan listened the way servers listen, all hum, no judgment. His office was a closet of cables and stale energy drink, his eyes sandpapered by a lifetime of avoiding meetings. 5 minutes, he said, tapping lines of code like a pianist tasting a theme. Maintenance window at 3 a.m. I can hijack the internal bulletin system and pipe a camera feed to every break room and common monitor. I'll disguise the header as a facility-wide safety test. After 5, maybe 6 minutes, the system notices I'm lying and slaps me. 5's all I need, I told him, and then I went to find the floor. Omar stood in the East Common, the only room in the building large enough for both shifts to breathe at once. He had already cleaned it to a reflective quiet, the kind of shine that makes you stand up straighter without knowing why. "The floor is new," he said, "eyes on the grid. It will show everything." He wheeled over a tall maintenance flood, lamp head tilted down like a question. "And the light here is strong. A man will turn away." The last signature was rocks. I typed up a form with the precise bureaucratic poetry compliance loves. Live glare compliance check, East Common, 5 minutes during shift overlap. To verify maintenance floods, do not violate direct line of sight exposure thresholds. Results to be filed prior to sunrise. He read it. He looked at me. He signed, because denying a textbook safety drill creates the sort of memo that breeds memos. We set the clock. At 2:56, the East Common murmured with a handoff. Day shifters early for coffee, night shifters late to leave because leaving means starting to be tired. Omar's chalk tick, no thicker than a fingernail, waited at dead center, just back from the seam that would throw a shadow under the overhead lights. The flood towered a dozen feet away, unplugged, patient. Ethan caught my eye from a corner, face pale in screen glow. He lifted a hand once. Ready. Ben entered with the casual velocity of a man orbiting a coffee machine. I stepped into his path like a friendly hazard. "Ben," I called, easy, "give me a second. Quick safety check." His smile came on like a motion sensor. "Of course, Ryan." Happy to help, I put him on Omar's mark, feet aligned by a compass only machines carry. He stood facing the blank head of the dark flood. Ethan's hands moved. Every monitor in every common room and break room in the complex seized the signal and filled with our faces under the caption, "Emergency Safety Bulletin. Eye safety test in progress." Conversations thinned into air. Heads turned. Caleb's office, wherever it was, surely bloomed with the same light. I started with a toy question and a clock behind it. "Hey, they swapped the vending bars again? Try the sun-dried tomato." A normal answer has edges. Yes, no, God, no. What demon asked for sun-dried tomato? Ben's answer was smooth as a floor waxed to a lie. "No, they still have the jalapeno cheese. That's my favorite. The jalapeno cheese bars had been pulled last week." A small ripple of glances moved through the crowd. Snack people, the ones who count weeks by flavors. I flicked my fingers. 2 guards I trusted. Their names were Dave and Lisa, in a world that insisted on titles, stepped to either side of Ben. Ben, did you file the Coil 4 report? Dave asked. Ben, is it true they're changing holiday rotation? Lisa asked, half a beat later. The pause was complete. He didn't ask them to repeat, didn't prioritize, didn't say, hang on. He stopped like a frame burned in place and held the mouth in the shape of the last syllable he'd produced before the interruption. 2 seconds is a very long time when a room is waiting with its lungs empty. Then the smile refreshed, perfect and late. Let's stick to the safety check, he said, as if he hadn't been anywhere at all. Look at his feet, I said, my voice carrying because silence is a good conductor. People looked. We are all always moving, micro-corrections, balance checks, a private dance with gravity. He was planted on the chalk, as if lowered there by crane. Now the eyes, I said, and Omar hit the flood. The light came on like noon, dropped from a helicopter. The room recoiled, hands up, chins ducked, lids slammed down in reflex. I stepped out of the wash, half blind, and stared straight at Ben. He did not flinch. He did not squint. His pupils snapped to needles and held while the skin around his eyes stayed politely uninvolved. 10 seconds. 15. The crowd's whispers picked up a frequency I have only ever heard around accidents and miracles. Caleb arrived the way a lid arrives on a boiling pot. Everyone, he called, voice pitched to authority and care. Please, this is a simple synchronization lag. It resolves. Let's give our colleague privacy. Ethan's feed still held 5 minutes longer than any of us had a right to expect. Rock pushed through bodies that couldn't decide whether to be a crowd or a jury. He looked from Ben's unblinking face to Caleb's carefully assembled concern and chose a procedure that hadn't yet been redefined. Seal this area, he said, and the steadiness in his voice made the choice a fact. Nobody in or out. I want statements from everyone present. This is now an active investigation. The feed cut. It didn't matter. The image was printed on the backs of the eyes that had tried and failed to close. The machine's immune system responded before I could finish a cup of coffee. At 14:12, my device pinged with a notice flagged urgent, mandatory personnel reassignment, critical operational need. The email praised my exemplary performance under stress and assigned me to a priority rotation to Ares Prime, outbound at 7 a.m., no return window. The last line wished me success in supporting the colony. It was almost sweet. Omar found me in a loading bay that smelled like rubber and sleep. He held a folded rag like a priest bringing relics. They have made you a kit, he said, and handed me the rag. Inside lay a brass key of the kind the building pretends not to use anymore. Supply closet 4C, behind the reserve oxygen, he said, and vanished the way a map retracts into a pocket. The closet was supposed to be empty. Behind dusty canisters sat a regulation duffel that looked like no human hand had touched it. My name, Ryan Christopher Malloy, was stenciled in white letters without a single fuzzed edge. Inside, a pristine uniform in my size, folded with military correctness. A data pad already logged into me, populated with schedules and clearances, and a personnel file polished like a shoe. A replacement wasn't being arranged, it was preloaded. I left the bag where it pretended to be a favor and walked to Ethan's server room. He didn't need a summary. News like mine travels faster than cables ever will. They're going to do it, I said. They have the copy already ironed. His jaw set into the kind of line you only get from saying no to the same thing for years. I can't stop them from badging you, he said, hands already finding the keyboard the way a medic finds a vein. But I can make it expensive. We built it together, a single encrypted package that would detonate into clarity. My unedited incident reports, the raw 113A clip that showed a man not being a man for 3 hours and 4 minutes. Omar's photograph of the concentric dust ring, the waste logs with their translucent films that dissolved under solvent like candy pretending to be skin. The network diagram of the phone lines that rang once and folded back into compliance. The camera analytics with their whitelist of IDs flagged anomaly equals ignore. Ben's number circled because there are times for subtlety, and this was not one. A cover letter with names spelled correctly and roles attached like tags to a toe. Ethan wrote a trigger that was elegant and stupid simple. Your badge at the final outbound scanner, he said. That's the tripwire. If you clear it, the script executes, full package to every employee mailbox, the Department of Energy Oversight Committees, and 3 newsrooms with inboxes that hate surprises. Automated, I said, so no one could blame any hand for pulling the pin. Automated, he said, and saved it with a file name that looked like a serial number and felt like a prayer. I didn't threaten Rock. I reported a condition. I found him in the hub, his hands on a clipboard, like it might know a future not written by other people. Before 7 a.m., I said, you should be aware of an automated disclosure scheduled on my badge clearance. I laid it out clean, the way you hand a diver an oxygen gauge. His face, long trained to neutral, cracked into a hunted calculation. He could see both outcomes, a man shoved through a gate and replaced, or a project torn open by its own emails. Procedure had led him out onto a plank and asked him to take a step as if it were a hallway. The hours that followed were a clock made of teeth. I walked my last assigned loop along the outer perimeter, the building's lungs drawing and releasing the same air with measured indifference. At 6 a.m., the day shift began to badge in with fresh faces and hot cups and the lubricant of sleep. At 6:51, my device buzzed once with the small, tidy sound the system uses to announce that everything is fine. Update. Personnel reassignment canceled. Transfer order 881G rescinded due to clerical error in priority scheduling matrix. Please disregard previous notifications. We apologize for any inconvenience, clerical error, 2 words that can bury a body and fold the dirt back smooth. My knees didn't give out, but somewhere inside me, a room I'd braced for collapse stopped rattling. I stood still and let the truth of it burn through me and leave ash. I was not going outbound. Not today. The machine had blinked. By evening, the inbound gate was officially paused pending a quality assurance review. Rock was named lead. Compliance mandated me as primary consultant. They couldn't fire me, and they couldn't disappear me. They would absorb me. Rooms have more than one way of locking. I went back to the mezzanine above the sleeping gate, where glass pretends to be a barrier and reflection pretends to be company. In my pocket, my notebook lived under my uniform like a second sternum. I opened it to the first page and traced the blocked letters with a thumbnail, the word that began all of this: vacancy. The night on the other side of the glass breathed in its honest way. The building would learn to call what we'd shown it by a name it could train. Caleb would invent letters you could put on a slide. Somewhere in the administrative wing, Omar's buffer would hum over floors that didn't matter as much. Somewhere in a server, Ethan's privileges would burrow under new approvals. Somewhere in my inbox, a form would be waiting for me to put boxes around what I'd seen and call it care. But for the moment, the monitors were dark, the flood was off, and I had not been replaced. The room where the lie lives had been forced to open its door. For 5 minutes, the whole building had looked in. That was the broadcast. The rest would be edits. Months teach a building new habits. They teach people worse ones. By the time the inbound cycles resumed under the soft language of a paused investigation and a new protocol, I had an office with glass on 3 sides and a title that sounded like a password: Senior Transit Monitor. My desk faced the bay where the gate slept when it slept, and I learned to drink coffee without tasting it while watching the world's most expensive pendulum measure belief. The checklist with my name on it lived on every console: postural stability test, chronological memory verification, cognitive load response. The acronyms made a lattice. People were guided through it the way airport tape teaches you how to be a line. The first week back, we tested returning geologists, environmental techs, pipe fitters, a botanist who had named her plants and could not remember what she had named them. 7 of 10 flagged. Duty of care wrapped them in a schedule and an apartment with rounded corners. Compliance sent out an internal bulletin with a graph trending towards safety. A curve no one wanted to look under. I worked the mezzanine like a lighthouse keeper and tried to call it mercy. On the floor below, Rock ran the show with a face carved into resolve. Every instruction came measured. Place your feet here, eyes forward, answer after the tone. He had signed the audit, and the audit had come back branded and laminated and put in his hand. Authority had not made him taller. It had made him look like a man always standing at attention, even when he sat. I still saw Omar in the administrative wing sometimes, his mop gliding over floors that would never need to hold a secret. He did not look up when the gate hummed. I did not say his name. We nodded from distances like old sailors passing with their lights doused. Ethan kept to his closet of wires and approvals. His access lived behind gates now, each one requesting a reason for the reason he needed the key. He sent me brief messages that looked like inventories: ports closed, rules changed, alerts tuned, and sometimes, beneath the list, one line: still listening. We had made the machine blink on camera. The machine had learned to blink without moving. One morning, if you can call the moments before sunrise morning, in a place that lives on schedules rather than light, a cluster of 5 engineers stepped out of the staging airlock with the loose smiles of people who just stopped bracing for annihilation. I watched the slow bloom of steam around the seals, the hydraulic choreography of doors and confirmation beeps and human relief. Anna Sharma was among them, badge clipped, hair back, the kind of calm you get from teaching yourself to be your own quiet. She planted on the pressure plates, and the graph under her feet drew a straight road to nowhere. Zero sway, clean as a signature. Across the bay, Ben carried crates between taped squares like a textbook diagram. He was our control now, a metronome with a smile. He looked up at me through the glass, and because my body was still mine, I looked away. Rock asked Anna the patch question. She answered quickly, confidently, and 3 weeks behind. The screen on my desk waited for me to write the word we had trained it to expect: PTDV. It was a diagnosis our system could afford. Long-term observation, I typed in recommendations. Low-impact duties. The file made the little swallow sound it makes when you drop a person into a process. In the second week, We got a man who fought the light with his eyelids and passed the glare test by doing what a body is supposed to do: flinch, squint, curse under his breath. He failed CMV anyway, old data delivered with a new voice. The third week brought a woman who negotiated the flood with a forearm thrown up and a laugh she apologized for, then stood so still between blinks that the pressure graph might have been a horizon. No matter how they arrived, the outcomes wanted to rhyme. Caleb spoke to us in a meeting about compassion, and he meant compliance. PTDV training rolled out to supervisors and team leads, complete with a slide that put my last name in a font large enough to be a brand. My methods had become the way we promised care. The checklist printed and laminated and magnet clipped to walls. When I walked the corridors, I saw my name staring back like a mirror that refused to show my face. In the quiet of my office, the notebook still lived under the uniform, its pages scarred by the grit of pockets and shifts. First page, vacancy. It had been weeks since I'd written that word, but it kept writing me. Night taught me how to hear the gate's moods through glass. The coils sang differently at different loads. The harmonics nested in threes when the cycle warmed up. On the first heavy night of the fourth week, the chord under the floor changed. It wasn't louder, it was cleaner, as if someone had tightened a string until it learned the exact note compliance would prefer. The inbound manifest flagged a bulk return. 12 personnel staggered across an hour so the monitors and medtechs could play their parts with dignity. They came through like a parade of relief. The first 4 gave us the familiar pattern: fatigue, smile, gratitude, the straight line graphs. After a minute of human noise, the neat failures under questions that required time to have passed. And then the 5th, thin, tired scar under a brow like a dash, stepped onto the plates and drew a graph I didn't recognize. Not the messy scribble of human sway, not the flat calm of a post. A practiced imperfection, a shallow regular C, a metronome faking jazz. Rock frowned, a tiny muscle jumping near his eye. He looked up at my window. Caleb, who had taken to attending screenings the way investors attend ribbon cuttings, eased his hands together and made concern with his knuckles. The man blinked at the floodlight after exactly the interval a human eye likes, and I felt the ladder I'd built tilt under me. We weren't screening the factory. The factory was tuning itself to the screens. That night, I walked down to the service hall and poured Tide sludge into 2 cups by compulsion, not hope. The machine sighed and presented me with heat and bitterness. I tapped my knuckles twice against a cup that no one else held. The sound was small and clean. Behind me, the corridor carried a set of footsteps the way a radio carries a song it did not ask for. "Malloy," Ben said. He joined me at the machine without invitation and took the second cup like we had coordinated it. He lifted it, sipped, a neat, polite motion, and set it back on the ledge. Then he tapped his knuckles against mine, twice. The rhythm was perfect. The pressure was perfect. The timing was late by a heartbeat. I looked at him and saw every place the checklist had taught him to be people. He smiled, and the smile had learned where to crease. Eyes blinked, lids adjusted. A tiny shoulder shift performed tension as if it had feelings to throw away. Somewhere, a pressure plate would show a graph that danced a centimeter either side of human. "Good to be back," he said, and it almost sounded like a question now. "Everything is normal," I answered, because some scripts only let you write one line. Back on the mezzanine, my console filled with incoming schedules for the next day's screenings. Names, departments, badges, the grid that turns people into rows so they can be processed into duties, benefits, outcomes. The PTDV guide blinked politely in the corner, in case I needed to remind myself how to do the work my name was attached to. Down on the floor, Rock adjusted a cone nobody needed anymore because a form told him it was a safety requirement. Above admin, the ventilation system coughed and reset to a lower speed, a building teaching itself to breathe quietly. I closed my eyes and tried to see a way off the path we had paved with good intentions and numbered boxes. Shut down the gate? Not a lever I could reach. Give the package to the world again? The first blast had bought us a blink. A second would buy us a better mask. The truth had learned to wear my words. A proximity alert hummed on the console. Inbound auxiliary medical transport. The screen pulled a live camera feed from the staging airlock and framed the empty door with the same neutral curiosity it used for everything. The airlock cycled. The door opened. A gurney rolled out, a medical team shadowing it like parentheses, faces arranged to mean urgency without panic. Between the rails lay a body that looked like it had been printed this morning. No bruises, no scrapes, skin the color of a catalog. The badge clipped to the blanket flashed when it caught the light in a quick, thoughtless second. I felt the world tilt exactly the width of that rectangle. Malloy, RC. The breath in my chest decided not to move. Rock barked something that did not travel to where I was. The med team turned their backs in the practice choreography of privacy. The gurney disappeared behind a door labeled with a number that meant authorized to anyone who needed to ask. The feed cut to a gray square and then to a list of cameras that still agreed to be watched. I stood and didn't realize it until my chair fell back into itself. My hand was on the glass before my mind had the thought that should have come first, impossible, and then the other word, inevitable. Caleb's door somewhere opened and closed the way a trapdoor opens and closes in stories. On my console, the PTDV protocol blinked as if it had a suggestion for this too. The radio on my desk made a sound radios make when they are deciding whether to tell you something. Senior Transit Monitor to Medical Suite 2C, came a voice without a name attached to it. Immediate consult. I picked up my notebook before I picked up my radio. On the first page, Vacancy looked back. On the last page, there was nothing. I wrote a word without knowing whether it was a diagnosis or a warning. Return. The corridors between my office and 2C know how to carry a man. I moved down them with a sense of deja vu so strong it felt like a prey animal's sense of terrain. Every vent, every seam, the spot where a bolt makes the floor hum on a B-flat when the scrubbers fire heavy. The door to the suite recognized my badge like it had always meant to. Inside, the light was the kind that hides dust. The gurney waited. The med team had performed all the motions that mean we are doing everything. Caleb stood to the side, arms folded the way an apology folds itself when it knows it won't be offered. Rock had the stance of a man holding in enough air to stay upright. On the bed lay a face I knew well enough to hate. The haircut was wrong by a centimeter. The scar on the forearm had not been earned. The chest rose and fell on a schedule more disciplined than adrenaline. Someone had printed me better than sun and time ever could. "Ryan," Caleb said, and the warmth he used was the kind you set out for gets you plan to feed to something. We need your expertise. I stepped to the side of the bed and looked down at the brochure version of my own being. I wanted to raise a hand and touch the pulse in my own throat, check whether it still had a stutter near coffee. I wanted to ask whether he dreamed in noises or words. I wanted to tell him about tide sludge and chalk, and what it costs to learn your name can become a form. Instead, I did the thing the system would always let me do, the one thing it couldn't yet write for me. I watched. Postural stability, Caleb prompted softly, as if conjuring my checklist into the room like a saint's icon. Chronological memory, cognitive load, or, Rock said, something rough alive behind the evenness. We could start with his name. The eyes opened. For a heartbeat, they were just eyes. Then they found the ceiling, the light, the polite faces. They tracked slow and steady to me. He smiled, and the motion was almost human enough to forgive. I saw his lips shape the first word he ever had to form. Malloy, he said, and I did not know whether he was naming me or himself. Out in the corridor, the gate's hum took a breath. The building listened to itself. I should have felt triumph. Proof made flesh and laid out under lights with witnesses. What I felt was smaller and sharper and closer to bone. We had trained the mask well. We had written a language that taught a lie to speak like care. We had given the factory its own inspector and called that safety. Begin, Caleb said, and the room filled with gentle instructions that knew how to be orders. I opened my notebook to the last page and drew a box where a new word would go. The pen hovered, waiting for me to choose whether to write symptom or story or surrender. Through the window, the desert carried the first pale hint of day, as if morning had remembered us. There are books that end when a door closes, and books that end when a door opens. Mine ends with a door that cycles on a timer, admitting whatever comes to it because that is what it is built to do. Somewhere in the building, a coffee machine hissed. Somewhere, Omar's buffer hummed across a floor that would never again be asked to listen. Somewhere, Ethan's approval request blinked on a screen and waited for a finger that would never arrive. Night is honest, I said, and no one in the room looked at me because the tests had begun. The pen touched paper. I wrote the only word I had left that didn't already belong to them. Witness.